McCallany played FBI agent Bill Tench on Mindhunter, and season 2 of the show explored the Atlanta child murders, but also went deeper into Tench's family when his son was involved in a very disturbing incident of his own. So what did you think about getting to explore Tench more deeply in the second season?
Look, I was very grateful to the writers and to David Fincher for deciding to allow the audience to get to know Bill a little bit more deeply. And obviously, his domestic life is a big part of who he is. The storyline that involved my son was based on a real incident that happened in San Francisco in the 70s, where two brothers, killed a young toddler, and I really enjoyed that part of it. In order to create a really well-rounded character, a character who feels like he's three-dimensional, a character, you can't just see him at work. You got to see his home life too. And but in a lot of television, especially a lot of cop shows, they become obsessed with the cases, they become obsessed with the procedural elements of the show, and very often what the audience doesn't get to see as much of is the character's home life. So for me, when I understood that this was going to be a big part of season 2, I was very happy, and I was very grateful, as I said, to David Fincher and to all the writers on the show.
And one of the interesting things about Tench and getting to know him better in particular is that he's a very reserved person. He's kind of like the Rock, where he's trying to make sure Holden is on the straight and narrow. He's trying to keep his family together. What's it like trying to kind of balance this character that is very, very much internal and very, not very outwardly expressive of a lot of deep emotions, but at the same time going through a lot of these deep emotions, both with the case and with his family?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, the truth of the matter is that in season 2 of Mindhunter, my character Bill Tench is really being pulled in 2 different directions, because he wants to be a good husband and a good father, but at the same time, he wants to be a good detective, and he wants to live up to his responsibilities as an FBI agent. And we're working on a very important case, the Atlanta child murders, and it's meaningful to him, and he wants to make a contribution that's valuable. At the same time, he knows that he needs to be there for his family, and so it's that juxtaposition, it's that conflict that forces him to kind of try to be in 2 places at once, but never really able to do it in the way that he did it. That's what's hard for Tench in season 2. One of the things that's hard.
And his marriage, of course, becomes so strained over the course of what they're doing with their son, and we also get to know his wife Nancy, played by Stacey Roca, a lot better in the second season. What was it like, kind of getting to see more of that marriage and play more of that marriage with her, even under these circumstances where everything is kind of crumbling between the 2 of them?
Right. Well, Stacey Roca is Rocca. I think she says Rocca. She's British, and she's very talented. And we had a good relationship, as actors working together, and I liked her personally enormously. But there were similarities, to be honest with you, between my relationship with Stacey and my own father's relationship with my mother. Stacey wants the marriage to work, and she would like Bill to step up and do the things that she feels that he should do. But, he's also a guy who is obsessed with his job and who feels a real obligation to the men that he works with. And he's not quite sure how to be a father to his son, because he has a son that has psychological and emotional problems. and he suspects that those problems are much deeper than he wants to admit to himself, and certainly than he wants to admit to her, because he knows how deeply that would alarm her. And what if he's wrong? So, eventually she leaves him. And, not to get too personal in an interview like this, but, eventually my own mother walked out on my father in a similar way. No goodbye, no nothing, just, we're done. And I understood why she did it, in the same way that I understood why Stacy walked out on me, why Nancy walked out on Bill, if you prefer. It's because even though he believes that he tried his best wasn't good enough. Comes down to that.
And, of course, his relationship with his son is also incredibly difficult for him, as you said, because he has psychological problems, and his son is not very expressive, certainly at all either. I remember this one scene in particular, the scene where, you're out bringing him, getting him ice cream, and I think we get so much of where, Bill's kind of anxiety, where he tells his son, he admits like he's terrified of what's happening. What was it like shooting that scene and just kind of bringing that out of Bill, that vulnerability?
Yeah, sometimes an actor is lucky because a director can say something to you that really kind of makes everything click in your mind. And I remember that on that day in that ice cream parlor, which was the last scene that I ever shot with my son, I remember David Fincher saying to me, "This is the moment when you realize that this is what it's going to be. It's not going to get better, that the problems that this young man has are problems that are going to persist, perhaps indefinitely, and that his unwillingness to communicate with me and my inability, for whatever reason, to communicate with him, we're not just going to wake up one morning and find that that's changed, that this is it. This is what it's going to be." And I think that that's the heartbreaking, thing in the scene. It's that, that it's that moment when Bill admits to himself that it's foolish to hang on to a lot of hope that things are going to magically improve, because sometimes they're just not. But you see, what do you do if you don't have hope? Hope is an absolutely essential thing in human life. And I try in that scene to reach my son, but ultimately I can see that I don't reach him, that I'm not going to reach him. And that was something that David gave me that was very useful to me as an actor.
And to have, to be playing a character who's going through that, and also dealing with these this really horrific murder mystery in Atlanta, which is also based on factual events. But how much did you know about the real life case of the Atlanta child murders before going into this, and how did you do a lot of research, or did you kind of?
Well, absolutely. Look, I mean, you always have to do a lot of research if you're telling a true story, because as the late great Senator Daniel Moynihan used to say, you're entitled to your own opinion, but you're not entitled to your own facts. The facts of the case are the facts of the case. you better familiarize yourself with them to the greatest extent possible. I was lucky. I had a friendship with John Douglas, who is a very famous FBI agent who had worked on the Atlanta child murders. They call it At Kid. That was the case name. And John sent me his files. Everything that he had. John, of course, wrote the book Mindhunter that our whole show is based on. And all of the stuff that he had compiled about Wayne Williams. Wayne Williams actually, John Douglas had created a profile, and the profile contained, I believe it was 21 or 22 different characteristics that the suspect, when apprehended, that should correspond with. And my recollection is that that Wayne Williams corresponded with like 19 or 20 out of the 21 characteristics that John had identified in the profile. So a very accurate profile. And even then, when I've spoken to John and other FBI agents that were involved in the case, they don't believe that Mr. Williams was guilty of all of those murders. And the mayor of Atlanta recently reopened the case because there are a lot of people down in Atlanta who were there who don't believe that Wayne committed all those murders. But yeah, a tremendously sad chapter in our history. And, really dark, really grim. And it was, it affects you. When you read about these, these poor children who were abducted and raped and murdered and dumped, in the woods, where their bodies just kind of like decay. I mean, it's dark stuff, but it's real, and it happened, and it was deserving. It's a story that deserved to be told, and I have tremendous admiration for for our producers, for having the courage to take it on, because there's nothing sexy about it. You could make the argument that the Manson family, and the Tate LaBianca murders, that there was something sexy about it. And I'm not trying to suggest that, what happened to Sharon Tate, that there was any possible, it was horrific and gruesome and tragic and unnecessary and depraved. But you're talking about a movie star who's married to a famous European film director, and they live in Beverly Hills. And, the Manson family, were this group of, like free love kind of, drug taking, late 60s sort of hipster kind of hippie types. There was something, there was a side of it that was a little glamorous in a way, if I can use that word, if it's not the wrong word to use in this context. There's nothing glamorous about the Atlanta child murders. You're talking about a nameless, faceless, young African-American, primarily boys. There were a couple of female victims, but, who were killed and then forgotten. And it took a long time before the Atlanta Police Department and the FBI really were willing to acknowledge that, that this was a case of serial homicide. They treated them initially like individual cases, and I don't know that too many producers would have chosen to do the Atlanta child murders, because like I said, it's very sad, and it's very dark, and it's just grim and relentless, and lacking any of the sort of it'll never be a piece of Hollywood folklore, Quentin Tarantino is never gonna make a movie, like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood about the Atlanta child murders, and that's not a criticism of Mr. Tarantino. I'm just saying it's a very different kind of a case. And on Mindhunter, we had, we thought it was important enough. And I say we, I'm an actor on the show, so I just do the best I can, with the scripts that they send me. But the fact that they chose to spend so much of season 2 focusing on that particular case, I thought was really to their credit, because it's a very sad, very, very disturbing, very unsexy crime.
And another thing that sort of makes it kind of brave as a subject to tackle is as you mentioned, it's a case that was quote unquote solved, but not resolved. Not all of the cases seem to tie up very neatly. And a lot of mystery shows, it's about you find the killer, credits roll. This the kind of uneasiness that the kind of uncertainty brings is I think a really intense part of the effect. Like this show takes me down a Wikipedia rabbit hole every time I want to kind of learn a little bit more about a thing and realize, oh, there aren't all the answers aren't there. They never were there, and it's almost more disturbing than some of those other cases you mentioned that have more of a sense of glamour or sensationalism to them.
I think you're absolutely correct. And there's nothing more gratifying, for us, than for me, when I hear people say, "Oh my God, I watched the episode, with Ed Kemper, where the actor Cameron Britton gave this, extraordinary portrayal of a guy who called himself the co-ed killer, and I wanted to learn everything about him. I had never heard of that case, but I was so intrigued by it, that I had to study it. That's what's part of what's exciting about doing a true story.
Now, the show is indefinitely on hold at the moment, but not canceled per se, but the actors were all released from their contracts, which I know must be, a disappointing thing to not be able to continue the story. Is it something that you'd be excited to go back to, like if and when the opportunity came about?
Look, absolutely. And the reason for that is because audiences really love the show. I've been a professional actor for 35 years. And I've been in a lot of films, and I've been on a lot of television shows. But Mindhunter was the first time that I really had people, stopping me in airports, coming up to me in restaurants, in line at the bank, wherever it might be, to say, "What a great show! What a really extraordinary, just a quality piece of filmed entertainment." And to give credit where credit is due, it all starts with our director, David Fincher. But then it's also a great team of people behind the camera and in front of the camera, and we had a great experience making the show. And I really liked the actors that I worked with, not just Jonathan Groff, who is an amazingly talented young man who plays my partner on the show, and with whom I think I'll have a lifelong friendship. But there were many people, some of them who played, the serial killers. I mean, we got terrific performances from the guys playing Ed Kemper, Charles Manson, David Berkowitz, Jerry Brudos, and Tex Watson, and many, many others. And, and for me also, it was an opportunity, to go back and to learn more about this period and about these people. And you said one other interesting thing that I'd like to follow up on. A lot of people ask me about the character that Sonny Valenti plays, that the BTK, Dennis Rader, Bind, Torture, Kill, and we see him, at various times. I'm investigating him, you know what I mean, and slowly familiarizing myself with the case. But Dennis Rader was one of the serial killers who was at large for longer than anybody else. 34 years. I think he's, let's see, no, 31. He was arrested in 2005. His first murders were in 1974. So for over 30 years, Dennis Rader was at large, and he lived in Wichita, Kansas, and he went to church on Sundays, and and he had a wife and a family, and it wasn't until very, very late, and he made a mistake and started out of ego, started taunting, the police, and it eventually led to his capture. But never did we imagine when we started making Mindhunter, our first season, we're like 78, 79. By the time we get to Atlanta, we're 1980, 1981. We never imagined that the story would continue to 2005 when Dennis Rader was finally arrested and incarcerated. Look, John Douglas, who's a friend, he wrote a book called BTK, a book I highly recommend. But, he met with Rader after Rader was already incarcerated. So this was years after John had already left the FBI. And what did David Fincher say to me when I said, what are we going to do? Because we're never going to be able to catch that guy. And what he said was a very interesting thing that really stayed with me. That's part of law enforcement. That's part of the reality of the job. You don't always get the guy. Sometimes criminals get away with it. There are guys who get away with murder, who get away with multiple murders. That's just Zodiac. We still don't know who that is, right? So even though, Dennis Rader might be the guy that Bill Tench and Holden Ford never catch, it's okay, because that's the way it is in real life. So why shouldn't it be that way on our television show?
Well, I want to congratulate you on both seasons of the show. As one of those fans, I would love to see it continue at some point down the road if the stars should align. And thank you so much for talking to me today.
Hey, listen, it's a pleasure. I enjoyed our interview immensely. Your questions were excellent, and I'll say this to wrap it up. I'm still optimistic that there can be another season of Mindhunter. I know we don't have an official pickup, and but nor were we officially canceled. And people really like the show, and I think it's not too late for us to come back. So my hope is that we haven't seen the last of Bill Tench and Holden Ford, that we haven't seen the last of Mindhunter. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed.
Yeah, fingers crossed, and maybe you'll even catch the guy. You never know. Sometimes you do. You don't always, but sometimes you do.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah, terrific interview. Thank you very much. I enjoyed it.